The Far Quest, The Chronicles of Cursoon, Book 1, by R. Jason Lynch. Chapter 35, A Dark Tale. Shortly before sunset, Cursoon and Fane came floating back through the sunken outer gates of the castle. Pulling the leaf-shaped boat ashore, they followed their ears to where llElevenLabs was still absorbed in his labor. Because of this, the old gnome did not hear them approach, but when he turned to reach for a tool, he found the pair watching him. Rolling his greenish-hazel eyes, he grumbled,
"I see you found your noblins."
The new term was said with a scoffing tone. Refocusing on his work, he added,
"I didn't appreciate you and your kin scattering my things around our camp."
"Sorry about that,"
Fane replied while dropping his indigo eyes. The old gnome sighed and then irritably hit a wooden peg with his hammer.
"What new thing are you making now?"
Fane asked as his gaze shifted to gold.
"Ask him. He's the one who drew it up."
llElevenLabs growled while gesturing over his shoulder at Cursoon. The noblin's eyes turned blue as he looked to the bard with an expectant expression. Cursoon shrugged.
"I don't know. I just saw this airship in a dream, and I hoped—"
Fane sucked in a huge gasp of air and then squealed with excitement.
"Airship? Do you mean it flies?"
"Hammers and pegs."
The old gnome snarled and then took the pieces of wax out of his pocket and stuffed them back into his pointed ears. Seeing llElevenLabs' mood was souring further, Cursoon decided to take Fane and return to the castle to prepare their evening meal. All the way back to the great hall, the little noblin peppered the bard with questions about the airship.
"How does it fly? How fast is it? Will it have wings? How high can it go?"
Long after the sun had vanished beyond the western horizon, llElevenLabs came into the great hall where Cursoon and Fane waited for him at one of the tables. They had set out 3 plates, 3 bowls, 3 spoons, and 3 cups. Thus, when the grumpy old gnome came in, they made ready to eat. Fane hurried over and pulled out llElevenLabs' chair, and when the little man sat down, he only grunted his appreciation. Likewise, Cursoon spooned some stew into his bowl and laid a slice of hot bread onto his plate. To this, the little man also gave a grunt of thanks. As the bard and the noblin sat down, Cursoon moved to fill the gnome's cup with hot tea, but llElevenLabs quickly covered it with his wrinkled hand and wordlessly glowered at the bard. Cursoon only shrugged, set the teapot down on the table, and took up his spoon to start eating.
"Wait!"
Fane almost shouted with fiery orange eyes. The 2 other men glanced at him with slight expressions of surprise.
"We haven't given thanks yet,"
the noblin explained in an apologetic tone. Cursoon smiled warmly.
"You're right. Please, you do the honors."
llElevenLabs simply grunted his indifference. Fane's eyes glowed bright yellow as he looked toward the ceiling and said,
"Thank you, King, for the stew. Thank you, Prince, for the bread. Thank you, Herald, for the tea."
With that, they ate their small dinner in silence, while the old gnome took many long draughts from his wooden flask. After some time, Fane spoke up.
"What's in your pretty wooden bottle?"
the noblin asked with curious blue eyes.
"It's the fruit of the vine, my little lad."
llElevenLabs answered with a chuckle, and then gave a wink to Cursoon, which was very out of character for the old gnome.
"It must taste very good to make you so much less grumpy,"
the noblin said innocently. llElevenLabs let out a laugh and then declared,
"Aye, you can always count on the forest children to say it honest. Here, have a little sip to see if it's to your liking."
Fane hopped from his chair with yellow eyes. Coming around to the little old man, he held out his cup. Carefully, llElevenLabs let a few drops fall inside.
"I'm not sure that's a good idea,"
Cursoon interjected.
No harm in a little sip.
Tippleglee replied, but then he turned back to the Noblin.
I'll give you more if you like it.
The gnome promised with a wink. Fane nodded and turned the cup up, taking the sip into his mouth. Immediately, he spewed it out again.
Ew, your grape juice has gone bad.
The Noblin sputtered. Tippleglee laughed with such force that he almost fell out of his chair. Seeing how much the gnome's mood had improved, Cursoon decided to take a chance. After a moment more of deliberation, he finally spoke up.
I had a conversation with the Lady of the Forest today.
The bard began.
Aye.
Tippleglee said with little reaction.
But she never actually spoke.
Cursoon continued carefully.
Afterward, I asked Fane why she didn't talk to me, and he said she couldn't, but he didn't remember why.
The old gnome shrugged.
The forest children find it difficult to recall dark tales. It's against their nature.
Really?
Cursoon replied with a curious look as he glanced over at Fane, but the Noblin looked just as surprised as he. The little fellow's eyes turned indigo as they darted back and forth from one man to the other.
Fear not, my little fuzzy-headed lad.
Tippleglee laughed.
Surely, we all wish we were so blessed as you and your kin. Aye, to forget all the evils of our lives. What a happy curse.
These last words were said with a sad wistfulness that hinted at a deep secret sorrow. Fane's eyes shifted to blue.
Really?
Cursoon could not allow himself to be distracted by this new detail concerning the forest children. Every other time he asked about the mysterious singer in the wood, Tippleglee had refused to give any answers. So if his present mood was an opening for that conversation, the bard was not going to miss this chance to learn more about Pine. Before the gnome had a chance to reply to Fane's astonished response, Cursoon gently interrupted.
So, do you know why she can't speak?
The bard asked cautiously. Tippleglee took an unusually long drink from his flask, and then he sat quiet for many minutes. Cursoon was about to give up hope when, at last, he spoke again.
She doesn't speak 'cause she's a dryad.
Tippleglee mumbled, while tracing the grape leaf on the side of his flask.
A dryad?
Cursoon echoed with amazement.
Aye, that's what I said.
The gnome grumbled.
And she can't speak save by the moving of her hands.
But she can sing.
The bard put in with a puzzled look.
True, that is, but she can't make words.
Tippleglee confirmed, without further explanation.
But I thought dryads were the spirits of trees, not flesh and blood like us.
Cursoon said with a frown.
Tree spirits, are you so easily taken by old wives' tales?
Tippleglee scoffed, stood, and stumbled away from the table. Returning with his wheel fiddle, he wobbled slightly and then began to play a sad melody. It was the same song that Pine had sung. When he finished the tune, he slowly turned the crank of the wheel one last time, and the music seemed to hang in the air as he did so. Finally, the old gnome sat down, carefully laid his wheel fiddle on the table, and took another drink. Then, after a deep breath, he began to speak in a low, reverent tone.
Long ago, when a little green lingered still in the wide valley of serenity, an elf maiden—
Elf?
Cursoon echoed in a questioning tone.
Are you telling me that elves are real too? And anyway, what do elves have to do with dryads?
Surely you'd learn more if you spoke less.
Tippleglee replied with slightly slurred speech and a roll of his greenish-hazel eyes. Clearing his throat, he started his story a second time.
An elf maiden was strolling through the great wildwood, and oh, how she loved the forest. However, she did a thing you shan't ever do. She whispered her deepest desire aloud. Ears in the shadows perked up to hear her say, I wish I could speak to the trees. and they took these words to their dark king. Thus Perfidious formulated a dastardly plan, and so he took a single fig and twisted it by his corrupting power. Then Perfidious came to the elf disguised in light.
Who is this Perfidious?
Kirasoon interrupted again.
He's the same your folk call foe.
Tippleglee growled.
Now, stop interrupting.
Sorry.
The bard quickly apologized. Waving him away, the old gnome continued his tale.
Perfidious.
Pausing again, he glanced irritably at Kirasoon and then started over, using the more common name.
Foe told the elf that he had a magical fig that could give her the power to speak the language of the trees. So, when he freely offered it to her, she took it gladly. But every fisherman knows a free nibble hides a steel hook. And sure enough, after she ate it, one of the fig's seeds lodged itself in her throat. It wasn't long before the seed began to grow, and so it shot out roots, strangling her and tearing great holes in her delicate neck. Moreover, her skin turned as grey as the bark of a tree. Her hair went from gold to charcoal grey, and her eyes lost all their colour. Why? Her mind screamed, but she could no longer speak, for her throat was utterly destroyed. Looking into her anguish-filled grey eyes, Foe guessed her question easily enough. "What?" he asked with a mockingly hurt tone. "I've simply given you what you desired. You wanted to speak the language of the trees. It's not my fault their language is nothing but silence." With that, the cruel King of Shadows cast off his disguise of light, and after revealing his true form, he let out a wicked laugh and vanished from her sight. The fig's roots, they just kept on growing. Down they crept until they stabbed into the earth all around her. Before long, she was trapped in a tangle of roots, limbs, and leaves, until finally she was completely encased within a strangler fig. In the end, she looked more like a tree than a woman. Many were the years that passed, and still she stood there alone in the midst of the great wildwood. All the while, the fig grew up around her, until it was the grandest tree in the forest, what they call an elder tree. By that time, she was little more than a face looking out a hole in the fig tree's grey trunk.
Hearing a small sniffle, Kirasoon glanced over to find tears were freely falling from Fane's indigo eyes. They ran down and made streaks in the thin layer of dirt that covered his round cheeks.
I remember this story now.
He groaned and then added miserably,
And I don't like it at all.
That truly is a dreadful legend. And look, you've made Fane cry.
Kirasoon complained while secretly rubbing a tear out of his own eye.
"It's no legend, and didn't I tell you it was a dark tale?
Tippleglee shrugged.
But there's no cause to fear. The little lad won't remember it by morning. Hammers and pegs. He may even forget before we all go to bed."
The grumpy old gnome snorted and then took another drink, but before he did, he grumbled around the opening of his flask.
"There's more than a few things I wish I could so easily forget."
But surely there's a happy ending coming.
Kirasoon groaned.
It can't end like that. I mean, she had daughters, right? Elsewise, where did all the other dryads come from?
Tippleglee bristled.
"Not all stories have a happy ending, lad."
Please,
The bard replied in almost a whisper.
don't leave the tale there. I need to believe there's still hope.
Suddenly, Tippleglee understood that Kirasoon was not just talking about his tale. The old gnome had seen that look before, those eyes that pleaded desperately for any hint of hope. In times past, he had disappointed those eyes, and the memory of that wounded gaze chased him deeper still into his flask. With a quivering sigh, the old gnome took another long drink, and then he spoke into the mouth of his bottle so that his slurred words echoed eerily.
When deep and heavy lay shadows dark, the faintest hope is like the brightest spark.
Tippleglee mumbled as though he was repeating some ancient poem, and then added,
Or at least that's what my dear old mother used to always say.